How was Vandas the other day?
Oh, amazing.
I heard, Derek told me y'all got the double big boy. I was like, "Dang, that'll hurt you." It did. Make you feel good, but that'll hurt you. Especially if you gotta work afterwards.
Well, thank God we did.
We call in sick after lunch. Good morning, good morning.
Oh, good, you were coming.
Oh, okay, good deal.
House this weekend.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, do you have a lesson down there or something?
Well, that, and we went to Lake Fork yesterday.
Oh, y'all went fishing? Y'all doing good?
No.
Really? A little early, yeah.
One white perch.
Oh, y'all white perch?
Yeah, we were.
That's cool.
I guess that fun that they come through and off all the fresh water and just.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, all that water, cold, lock them up.
It was fun. We went out nice. We will have to meet you out.
Yeah.
Always heard about it. And I ordered an armor. They've been in Dallas since 2017.
Was from here, but.
No, that was before. And I ordered, because I'm going out of town this weekend, I have, and I ordered new shoes.
Yeah.
I do not want to walk on the creek all day in uncomfortable shoes.
He was,
My husband said they will probably, he said maybe they'll just show up Monday instead of, because we're going on Tuesday. Update, that's what I'm doing. I need to go ahead and go let you just go to Dixie. Buy you a shirt. I just paid. It just I don't have Kristen and some shoes that had these mine his came from even if it is a one trip. Well, I've seen luckily they did really good. They did much better than their app this year. Yeah, so it will be. No.
and I said, well,
How are you?
okay, I don't want to lose this. And I was telling Jason, he was impressed, and so I called the guy. So I'm coming in about 2 weeks. I'm coming down. I saw him not too long ago. Look, he sent me a box. Every single competition he does bass fishing. He sent me a box. I still got stuff. I had to take advantage of that. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody is well on this. Can you hear me all right there, Jesse? All right. Good morning, live stream. For you online folks, I think I finally did figure out my GroupMe stuff. I was doing it on a computer, if you saw the thing, but I was able to upload the document on my phone. I asked Lindy, she said, "Oh, I didn't know you could do GroupMe on a computer." And I was like, well, obviously can't do it too very well. So I bring you greetings from Corpus Christi, Texas. We were down there last week with my son-in-law and daughter-in-law and 2 grandkids. and it is. I've never been there that I remember. I think I went through there one time 30 years ago. It is a long way from here. Let me tell you, Corpus Christi is a long way. It took us right at 9 hours to get there and 9 hours to get back. 18 hours in a car with your spouse was great. It was really a wonderful time. It's exactly what you need right before a marriage retreat, right? Huh? No, she's not here. She's like, I've had enough of you. I need a break. No, Hayden is home, our youngest, just for the night and a couple of nights, and he was heading back early this morning, so she wanted to see him, so it was good to be there, but it was good to be home. No place like home, right? For sure. But thank you guys too for praying for Nathan. He, those of you know him, my son-in-law, he woke up on a Tuesday morning, the Tuesday before we got there on a Wednesday, and he was talking to his dad on the phone, lost hearing in his left ear, and fell down on the floor, just started vomiting everywhere, couldn't stand up, just extreme vertigo. And he's still kind of shaky. A week and a half later, still no hearing in his ear. Finally got into an ENT, and they're like, you just had some virus, and it's just created some damage. You may or may not get your hearing back. And so, and he's 30. I'm like, you're having those old man issues at 30. So anyway, my son's called me to check on him, and they're like, okay, when can we make jokes about being deaf in one ear? And I'm like, you can, it's good, I mean, I guess that's how our family operates, yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, when is this funny? So we are compassionate to an extent, but yeah, for a little while. Then you just got to suck it up, man. So we, but yeah, thank y'all, those of you new, thank you for praying for them. They're doing real well down there. One more thing I was going to say about that. Oh, thank you for Mike stepping in last week. We're going to piggyback on some of what Mike did last week. And today, all right, so this is, so I struggle in class. I don't want to get too in the weeds with all this, all right? Because you can get deep into the weeds. This is, as you'll see today, this can be, this subject in this field can be very complex and go a lot of different areas. And I don't want to do that because I want to make it very practical, because one of the main things we want to understand is that no matter who you are, you don't have to have any letters behind your name or anything. You can read and study and understand God's Word, not just at a surface level, but you can dig deep. It's not, it was written, remember the audience, and we'll reiterate this here in a minute. Remember the audience and the authors. They called them unschooled, ordinary men. And that's what we are. We're just ordinary people opening God's Word to dig in. It is not that, it takes work, it takes some discipline and effort, but it is a doable thing. It's a very, very doable thing. And so we really want to understand that and dig in and to begin to think exegetically, to pull back our original big word, to let the lead out of the text so that we can make applications instead of finding an application and going to the Bible to find it. Okay, so let's let the Bible lead us. We've emphasized slowing down, introduced some ideas of what to look for. We're going to do that again at some point. We're going to look at this idea called the biblical sandwich. You have this happen, this happen, this happen, and if you just look at them in individual instances, okay, you get something out of it, but when you take a step back and you look at it as a biblical sandwich of how this is all bookended with two pieces of bread and the meat in the middle, you're like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing there. We're going to spend some time in a couple weeks doing that. Some tips like journaling, leisurely reading versus study reading. Those are just some things, some practical things. I think this is probably going to be the last one where we kind of think deep on some things and look at some things. Next week, Mike Williams is going to be here and go through Blue Letter Bible. He'll have it up on his laptop and going through how to navigate all that. It's going to be really good, just very practical. We're going to talk about word studies, how to dig in and do word studies. So from here on out, the next 3 weeks or so, it's going to be very practical on how to do things with that. Okay, so I want to use some of the stuff that Mike talked about last week as a launching point to help us on some issues that we may face in Bible study. And again, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but to understand that our culture, and when I say culture, I don't mean necessarily our western southern culture, but church culture in general is dealing with a lot of issues when it comes to this. There's a big, I'm not sure if I'm saying the word, I think it's schism is the right word. Is that the right word? I know some people say schisms. I think it's really schisms. I'm not real sure. But there's a divide going on in a lot of churches right now over affirming churches and the whole homosexual debate, and both coming from Scripture trying to prove their point. And so churches are dividing over this, and there's a lot of emotional issues with that. So how we do that and how we approach Scripture is going to be very, very, very important with that. So along with many other issues as well. So what I want to do is I want to understand how people get where they are sometimes. And to that end, we're going to look at our biblical worlds, okay? The biblical worlds that are out there. One, there is this world behind the text. Now, just kind of, when I say the word world, what picture comes to mind? A globe. A globe. What'd you say? The earth. The earth. Okay. And what's that earth doing constantly? It's constantly changing. That's exactly right. Even if you get underneath it, it really is a beautiful thing, isn't it? Because it's literally, and I can't even do this. I'll throw my back out if I try to show you. But the earth is doing this. It's what, every 24 hours? Is that what it's doing? It's doing this. Did I get that right? And then, and every year it does this while it's doing this. If I did this, I went right to the 80s. And so it's doing this, and then the moon is doing this every month, right? Is that right? Yeah. And then the whole time it's doing this around the sun. That is like a dance thing. So who says, God created, the whole cosmos dances before God. Let's do it too. It's a, did I just lose something? Okay. I'm going to try to talk and do this at the same time. I think my battery just went dead. Sorry, I'm turning my back to you, and I'm about to bend over. So, things they tell you not to do, but it worked for Jim Carrey on The Tonight Show one time, so if you ever saw that. Anyway, all right. The three people that laughed saw that. Okay, here we go. So you think of the earth, you think of worlds, you think about all this. But so at some point, this Chinese spy balloon that came across the Midwest, what are you taking pictures of in Nebraska? I don't know, maybe missile silos, who knows? But the thing is, if it was taking pictures, or if there's satellite pictures and it comes around, it's going to take a picture because it's constantly moving, it's constantly changing. And that's exactly like our world. We've gotten to know some kids from Nepal, And their world is very, very different than our Southern American world that we have. All right, got to remember my super secret password here. But it's understanding that the world, if you're looking at Nepal or India in that Asian area, it looks very different. Their worldview is very different. Those of us who grew up in North Louisiana, our worldview is very different. If you grew up somewhere else, down in, was it Kaplan or Ville Platte? Kaplan, wasn't it Kaplan? Very different world, isn't it? Very different world. I've been there. It's a different world. and so it is the same thing with when we approach God's Word, the worlds that are there. So let's take a look. Okay, let me pull this up now, and so we can get back to where we were. I forgot to plug it in this morning. Where is it at? Here we go. Is that it? Uh-oh. Yeah, that's it. Let me do this. I feel all technically savvy here. A few of them probably could have already done it. So here we go.
Does it help to talk to yourself while you're doing it?
It does. It does. It really does. Well, is that? There we go. I think that's it. Is that it? Yeah, that's it. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So there's this world that's behind the text. It's a little bit different than maybe what you think. The world behind the text deals with the more technical aspects of it. It deals with how the text arrived to us in this finished form. We have how many books? How many different separate writings are in this volume? 66. What languages were they written in? Hebrew, Greek, and a little bit of Aramaic. How did it get to us? Well, somebody had to write it down. And then somebody copied it, and then somebody copied it, and they found all these things, and they translated it into a lot of different languages. And in the whole scope of things, the English language is pretty new in the whole scope of things. Only a few little, early 1600s since that they translated into English. So understanding the world behind the text, ask, how did it get here? How did it arrive to us in this way? It also asks questions like, what was lost, if anything, in translation? And it wants to know, all the footnotes that are in the bottom, it's interested in those footnotes, why it's there and why it's not. One of our favorite parts of John 8, the woman caught in adultery, is kind of separated, and there's this footnote that says some have it, some don't. Most of us read it and say, oh, okay, and keep rolling, but those who are interested in the world behind the text are like, okay, why is that? Let's examine that. Okay, the other thing it asks is what kind of information, what sources did those writers use? Who wrote, not really a trick question, but trivia, who wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament? Moses. What did Moses write about at the very end? His death and his burial. So someone had to come in and fill in the rest of it, right? So who did that? And then it makes you ask, did Moses really do that, or did he use a secretary? What about, so you start asking those questions. That's what the world behind the text does. It'll ask, so if you go to the Sermon on the Mount, go to the Sermon, you don't have to go to the Sermon on the Mount, I'm just saying, so if you take the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the world behind the text approach to things and people who ask would be asking questions. What source information did Matthew use? What part of this was he witnessed? What part of this did he pull from Luke or other sources? And then if you look, what was he referring to as far as, did he use extra biblical stuff? And they'll start asking things you might have read about, things that are called Talmuds, Mishnahs, or Midrashes. Those different things that if you've gotten into some of the thicker commentary stuff and read about it, there's source information from ancient times, intertestament period stuff that the Jews used. So, Kristen shared with me a library the other day that she reads, and one of the guys in there is Wright, J.H. Wright, Christopher Wright. I actually have a couple of his. He writes big, thick stuff like this. And I'd like to say I've read all of his stuff, but I've read parts of his stuff because it's really thick. He is a Old Testament scholar and is really good. And you have these guys that write like that. Well, they had them too. They had those guys that studied the scriptures. I mean, you saw Fiddler on the Roof. I've referred that a couple of times. You know, and they're in there asking the rabbi, what about this? What about this? And they had those rabbis, and they'd listen to the rabbis, and they'd write it down, and that would be their teachings. Well, you come along, and you have these rabbis in the intertestament period, and they say things like, I thank God every day that I was not born a Gentile or a woman. That's actually, I forget his name, but that was actually a thing. And that was became a pervasive teaching about how some of the people in the Jewish world, especially some of the leadership, viewed women. And Jesus comes along and says, oh, no. Unless you if you want to divorce your wife, you need to give her a certificate of divorce, just like Moses did. Moses said to do, instead of for any reason. Okay, so how did Matthew use all that? That's what the world behind the text will ask. And you think, wow, okay, that's interesting to know that. And it is. It would ask the questions like, how do Matthew and Luke deal with similar information but use it differently? And that's interesting to note, okay? So that's the world behind the text. So let the globe spin a little bit and do our cosmic dance here. And then we move to the next one, the world within the text. Now, this is where we like to camp out. All right, we like to hang out here because this is a little bit easier, and we start to find things a little more practical. And this deals with the text as we have it. You come to John 8, the woman caught in adultery, and you're like, man, that's awesome. We can all identify in some way with that story. Yeah, we'll let those deeper thinkers deal with all the footnotes and how it got here and how it didn't, okay? And we just deal with it as we got it. And it's going to examine genre, flow, author, recipients. It's going to ask questions. So if you come back to the Sermon on the Mount, it's going to ask questions from the Sermon on the Mount. It's like, how does all this fit together? When Jesus says your righteousness has got to surpass that of the Pharisees, and then he comes along several times and says, you've heard it said, but I tell you, you've heard it said, but I tell you, you've heard it said, but I tell you. How does all that fit together? We're looking at repeated words and phrases. How does that fit together into a literary whole? The world behind the text would say, you have heard it said, where? Because it doesn't say that in the Old Testament. Which Midrash, which Mishnah, which Talmud are they using to derive that information from? Okay, so that's the difference, and they overlap some. So it would also ask, the world within the text would ask, what's significant about the audience and the setting in the Sermon on the Mount? So Matthew wrote to Jews, and he's writing, and the Sermon on the Mount was just these normal Jewish everyday people like us, and he tells them, your righteousness has got to surpass that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, who were super Jews at the time, and there's no way we could do that. Oh, I don't know how to do that. We can't do that. So then he teaches them how to do it. How does that work? How does that fit in to what he's doing? How does that fit into other teachings that Jesus did in his main theme and how Matthew was using that? That's where I camp out a lot and try to understand the bigger thing, the whole context of it. Okay? Then you have the world in front of the text. this deals with the world the text creates. All right? So you have that underneath stuff of how it all got here. You got the stuff that we're trying to dig through the context and understand the situation and what prompted all this and what the meaning was. And then you've got this, okay, all this happened, but what about today? What does it create here? How did it change things? The people who were before us, most of the people before us, not everybody, the people in front of us and us all have a common denominator in place. We are secondary recipients. We weren't the primary recipient. Matthew wrote to a particular group of people that they received it. We're the secondary recipients of this. Just like Matthew is a secondary author. Who's the primary author? God is. God inspired him to write. And he is the author. Now, can we derive from that? Absolutely. If we can't derive as a secondary recipient, then why are we even here reading this and studying it? We are secondary recipients. And so navigating that is the emphasis of this, the world in front of the text. It changed things. So you go to the Sermon on the Mount, and it asks questions from this world. It asks, what kind of faith and practice does this call modern readers to? So you come along, and he says, I tell you, you've heard it said, do not murder. But I tell you, if anyone is angry with his brothers, you know, what do we do with that? Now, wait a minute. Now you're telling me, and then you start working that out. And what does that mean here and now? No, I don't want to kill anybody, but I sure have thought, well, yeah, I hope something bad happens to you. You know, it's one of those, okay, it's not murder, but it's on the same road. It's just we don't want to get down that far on the road. So that's how you would navigate that. And that's what that world just really kind of deals with the practical. It asks questions. What spiritual practices does the modern church and the modern Christian have to do to live out the Sermon on the Mount? And those are good questions, really good questions. How far do we go with turning the other cheek? Someone hits you on the cheek, turn them the other one. Well, I'm out of cheeks now, so now I can hit you back? No, not necessarily. How far does that go in oppression or abuse or violence? How far does that go in war? Is this a precursor for being conscientious objectors and Christian pacifists? Some people believe that, and they do that, and that's fine. So those are those wrestling questions that the world in front of the text. Did this create that? Those are the questions this world asks. All right. I don't want to, like I said, you can see this can get into the weeds really, really quick. And I don't want this to be like a math problem for you. You know, what do you do with a math problem when you're not real sure? You just go on to something else. You know. It's like I saw this video one time as you know, I watched some guitar videos, and then on my feed, and it says, you know, beginning guitarist playing a G chord, C, go to an F. All right, put the guitar away and walk off. That's exactly right. And I was like, wow, they could have just filmed me almost every day, you know. So, but I don't want us to be that. Like, I don't know. What do you do with that? I don't know. We're just going to go back to favorite verses and go from there. No. So I don't want to get into the weeds, but I do want you to understand this is the complexities of this. So when you come across people and you're teaching or you're leading a group and you have you know, a devotional that y'all are doing with your employees at work, and someone comes along and says, you know, things changed. You know, those things in the Bible that were once this, they changed. You got to understand possibly where they come from and how they got there. It's a pretty complex thing. And also you have to, you know, when you eat fish, what do? You spit out the bones. Yeah. And so you got to understand there's some good stuff out there, but you got to know truth well enough that, ooh, that's a little bony right there. I don't want that. So understand, this is just a little delve into that. So what do we want to do? We want to let our biblical worlds collide. So it's like reverse Pangea, you know. It's like, you know, Pangea is the idea that it was one big continent and it kind of erupted and drifted apart and, you know, looks pretty good, kind of fits together. But this is where it kind of sucks back in and pulls together. Worlds collide. And when worlds, you know, the whole plate tectonics thing, when it collides, things happen and creates other things. Let these worlds collide. Each view has value. It really is of value to look underneath the text and say, I understand why they had those divorce laws the way they did and why Jesus was teaching the way he was because of the pervasive thought. Look, there were Sadducees, Pharisees, Herodians, Zealots, all these different people that had these different views of Judaism in the first century, and they all came from the same source material of the Old Testament. So understanding what was going on, that has a lot of value. It's very valuable, and this is where I camp out a lot and what we teach a lot, of just getting into what was happening in the culture and what was happening in the historical setting and being able to understand even the culture around what was happening in whatever section you're studying. And it does pose questions for the future. It does create a whole nother world. If it didn't create another world, then the world would have stayed the same. Christianity, when Jesus came, died, and rose again, and the Holy Spirit was poured out and the church was started, it changed everything. I mean, within a short period of time, relatively speaking, they stopped watching people be eaten by lions and gladiators killing each other for sport. Now we put on helmets and pads and have concussion protocols. I'm just joking. I watch football too all the time, so it's just a joke on that one. But it is pretty fun though, isn't it? But we're not killing them, so that's good. But we valued human life much more. The world started doing that. So it changed everything. And so we have to wrestle with that. Each one has cautions though, all right? Cautions looking back in the world behind the text is you can get caught into the pedantic, overly scholarly, get lost in the academics of it all. And we begin to think, okay, well, I don't know all that, so okay, here we go. You know, I hate it, but I had a professor at Abilene Christian University, was a Greek professor, great guy, one of my favorite teachers. Within a couple of years after I graduated, he had left his wife and kid, somebody else, had a PhD in biblical languages. And so it's not about, I mean, you can get lost in all that and not, information, I don't know if I put it up here, did it? No. Information is not transformation. It's not. Information is not transformation. And that's with all of these. The one where we camp out, the world within the text, we can, and I tell you, I love it. I love the fact that we can make it more colorful and make it more understanding and have a fuller understanding. I love listening to Christy McClellan. If y'all have ever listened to Christy McClellan, she is really, really good. And we were driving to Texas one time, and Karen said, "You need to listen to this." I'm like, okay. I was trying to take a nap. I didn't go to sleep, I promise you that, because man, I just love that. I love the richness of that. But if we're not careful, we can get caught into the richness of that and miss the text with that. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day. They're like, I tell you what, I just don't think anybody can understand the Bible unless they understand all of that. Well, there's a lot of people that have understood the Bible that didn't understand that. And there are things that we didn't know that we know now, but we do have a fuller understanding. So we have to just keep the balance there. And then the world in front of the text, that's where a lot of people can get off the rails and like, well, you know, I don't care what it meant to them. Let's just get it where it applies to us. And there's value in that, but there's also caution. Anytime and this is just a general rule I try to follow personally. So I'm speaking here in a few weeks at CR on a Friday night, and they just said, you've got step 2. So, all right, I can go and I can do something there with that, not a problem. But I've been racking my brain and studying to find a place in the Bible where step 2 happened, where you were powerless and you couldn't do anything except admit that Jesus was your higher power. I mean, where is that happening? And I found one, and I'm all excited about it now. So if you want to come on the 17th or whatever that is, you'll hear a little bit about that. But finding that place in the Bible and let that speak to us instead of, okay, this is what I think, and then go to the Bible to prove it. That's eisegesis. So letting the worlds collide creates a fuller understanding. Definitely it creates a fuller understanding. If you understand some of the things that they were going through in the first century and how they got these things, how we understand the culture and the context really brightens it up. And it really is. It does make you think that, okay, I do need to be careful with how I react because it may be on the same road of what Jesus was talking about. It also invites humility. If Colin is, hey, I'm a world behind the text guy, I'm really interested in all these different manuscripts and all these things, and we really need to delve into that. I'm like, hey man, you know, that's good. Tell me what you think here. And Brandon back there is a world in front of the text guy, and I'm a world within the text, and we're sitting around a table. What can I learn? I can learn a lot if I'm humble. But if I'm thinking my continent's the only continent there is, then all right, you better get over here or something's wrong with y'all. And I become very prideful. So that humility keeps us humble. It also reminds us that the text is, I didn't put a D on there. The text is inspired, not our approach. Our approach is not inspired. The text is inspired. It is, as I said earlier, remember the authors. They're just plain people. You know, Moses couldn't even speak that well. At least he didn't think. And Peter, they called Peter unschooled and ordinary. Paul was probably the smartest of all, but he had to be literally humiliated in order to get to where he was. So understand, the writers were just like us. And the original hearers, most of them couldn't even read. That's why they heard it. So it keeps us, it reminds us that the text is the one that changes, is inspiring. And it's hard to explain, but it goes back to what I said a minute ago. Information doesn't transform. Inspired text transform. Let me give you another example of this. So one of my goals this year is to not be so mindless. Sometimes when you do what I do, this doesn't always turn off, and it turns on at odd hours of early mornings, like 3:30 or 4. You wake up and you think, oh, I've been sleeping for 9 hours, and you've been sleeping for about 4, and then you start thinking. So for years, I've just watched TV, just mindless TV, and look, we don't even have anything worth watching. I mean, we've got an antenna. That's about all we got. But I'm just flipping. And it's nothing on. It's usually between Me TV and Grit. That's really about it. And because there's just nothing on to watch. Reruns of The Tonight Show, maybe, of Johnny Carson. But I thought, it's just mindless because I don't think about it. I need to train myself this year to be a little more engaged in something else. So I started reading again. I'm really trying to train myself to read. And in the mornings or before lunchtime, I do my technical reading, stuff that I've really got to study. Then at night, I've been picking up some things that just are leisure reading. And I like reading and watching Westerns, okay? So I was telling Colin the other day, I started reading the Lonesome Dove series. And if you watch Lonesome Dove, You know, it's one of 4 books. And so I finished the first one. I'm in the second one. And, you know, they're pretty good. They're pretty good. Have you read them, Caitlin?
Not all of them.
Which one have you read? The
Like the
Dead Man's Walk?
like the
Oh, The Lonesome Dove, which is actually the first one, yeah. So, you find out who Blue Duck is if you read the second one. Yeah, you find out who Blue Duck is and why Blue Duck is the way Blue Duck is. And then you get like, you know, ladies' names, the Indian ladies' names with like heavy leg and hair on the mouth, hair on the lip, you know, things like that. It was just fun, you know. But, so I'm reading along, and they really got into something that I thought, you know, that's pretty good. That was like contemplative, made you think about it. It's just no Western novel that, and you got Gus McCrae there talking, and you're like, how did that come from? Well, the author really developed his character to create a message that was true, but it was a fictional thing. And I thought, man, he's really he was inspired by something to write that. And it hit me, and then my mind went to, and look, this was just last night I'm reading this. What about the Word of God? Here's Larry McMurtry, who was a good writer, well known, won prizes and awards, and he inspired people and was inspired himself. But that pales in comparison to what God did to these writers. He inspired, I mean, you think about it, Larry McMurtry was not inspired by God to write Lonesome Dove and Comanche Moon. But Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, Paul, Moses, Ezekiel were all inspired by God. The mind of God inspired them in their mind to write the hidden things of God to reveal. And then we get to read it, and that's the inspiration that transforms. You might read something in the book that says, that's really pretty good. You read something in this book and your life changes and you're like, how did that happen? I don't know. Because it's inspired by God. That's the difference. That's why information is not transformation. But the Bible, God uses His Word and His Holy Spirit and through the gospel to transform our lives. So, how do we as we land? Okay, does that make sense? Okay, a little bit there. Need to get to Dead Man's Walk and Comanche Moon, though. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. It really does help you understand some things. So how do we let these worlds collide? This goes to what Mike talked about last week. The aim. What's the aim? Author's intended meaning. I'm going to text Caitlin and say, Caitlin, you need to read Dead Man's Walk. You may not understand what that means. But what do I intend? Oh, if you like Lonesome Dove, it's going to help you understand where Blue Duck came from. And you may not understand any of that, but who does? She gets it. She gets it. But I intended that what I intended and what she heard is that's what we've got to get back to. Well, what it really means is that turn the other cheek means that whenever it comes to, we've got to pull the Hawkeye Pierce thing from MASH and be a conscientious objector and not carry a gun. Or the guy from Hacksaw Ridge. Look, that's noble and that's great. That's fine. But that's not what Matthew was talking about when he quoted Jesus saying, you got to turn the other cheek. Okay. Now, you might can get there, but understand the author's intended meaning. That's going to help our worlds pull all this together. The other is context circles. Is going to help pull these worlds together. You have a passage that has the immediate context. Turn the other cheek. How's that fit? Again, this is that world within the text approach. How does that fit here in the immediate context? Well, how does that fit in the larger context of Matthew 5, 6, and 7? Then what happens with the rest of Matthew and how does he do this? And then how is this even working in and out? And how did it get here? And why did Matthew use that? That goes back to the original approach, the world behind the text. And then how do we work this out in our lives? That's the world in front of the text. The context circles help us pull our worlds together. Again, what we're doing here is learning to think like that. All right, this is skills. This is just skill we're learning. And like I've said before, some days I'm good at this, some days I'm not. But pulling all that together, the author's intended meaning and the context circles help. The other thing that helps is this. Go back to our picture. Just go back to the picture of this interpretive journey. Going back to then and there before we apply here and now in learning to study. Whew. Okay, it's probably about 2 shovelfuls deep into it. We won't go that deep again, probably. To my circle? Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. You don't have your magnifying glass out?
I do, but
Oh.
contacts and readers, and I still it's
Oh, good night. Yeah.
I can't read.
Yeah. So where we're going next week? Bring your laptops, your tablets, your phones, whatever, or not. It doesn't matter. And Mike's going to be here. He's going to have his, and we're going to learn how to navigate Blue Letter Bible. Blue Letter Bible is probably one of the best free online resources out there for learning to dig in, how to look up Greek and Hebrew words, how to look at things, how this word is used other places, what Strong's numbering system means, what a Young's Concordance does and how it's different than the Strong's Concordance, and how to look at backgrounds and how to pull those things together and how to look at different translations. A very, very good tool and a very, very interactive app. Now, he'll be doing the PC version, the online, the web version of it though. Then after that, we'll get into, I won't be here next week, I'll be at the marriage retreat, and then we'll get into doing word studies, we'll look at genres, and then we'll look at the whole biblical sandwich stuff with that. Thank you for your patience. This is one of the toughest classes I've taught. It really is, because it's like you want to, I don't know where to go sometimes with it, but man, y'all are a generous audience. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, let me know. If I don't know the answer, we'll figure it out. I was going to say I'll make something up, but that's, no. I can't make that stuff up. Love you guys.